Hi everyone, David Aragona and Craig Milkowski here, taking a look at one of the graded stakes races on Saturday at Aqueduct, or Belmont at the Big A, as it's known during this meet. It is race 5, the Grade 2 Vosburgh, this year extended to 7 furlongs on the main track. And Greg, historically, the Vosburgh has been at different points one of the champion sprints in the country in recent years, a major prep for the Breeders' Cup. I'm not sure it's playing that role this year, as it's drawn a pretty small field of 5 with a lot of runners in the mix that just don't have a whole lot of accomplishments to their names.
No, that's true. There was a time, a little bit before my time, even as an old guy, where the Vosburgh was almost akin to the Breeders' Cup Sprint, where the winner would be named the sprint champion. But we're a long way from that with this race. Not the strongest contest. I don't know if it has anything to do with going back to 7 furlongs instead of 6. I tend to doubt it, though. But it's a race that we can still handicap.
That is true. It's a 5 horse field. And I think one of the difficult parts of this race to handicap is pace, because we've got a couple horses on the morning line that are pretty short. The number 4 Elite Power, who I said is the 6-5 favorite, and the number 1 Southern District at 2-1, who neither one has that much early speed, Craig. And that's really a theme throughout this field as we transition to look at the Timeform US pace projector. Kind of crazy to say in the Vosburgh, there is really no speed in this race.
There is not. The horse we show on a clear early lead, Jalen Journey. I actually saw him run at Charlestown, I believe was his last race. He was nowhere near the early lead, and he hasn't been near the early lead anytime recently. I think I looked back, the last time he led a race was over a year ago, and he runs quite a bit. So it's not like he had a layoff in between. It's just going to be really tough to predict how this race is going to play out.
Well, since a small field of 5, let's go through each runner in this race. We begin with the morning line favorite, the number 4 Elite Power. Let's take a look at his last victory at Saratoga. This was him winning his 3rd race in a row, an expensive son of Curlin, who just seems like he's really come to hand over the past several months for trainer Belmont. Greg, on this occasion, he was cutting all the way back to 6 furlongs and didn't seem to have any trouble with that shorter distance. He just closed down this field pretty impressively in the stretch.
He did. He's certainly been winning all its races easy. I think this was the 3rd one in a row, all by open lengths. His speed figures are decent. They're not really grade 2 type speed figures, but that doesn't really apply to this race. So he's obviously got to be a contender. Certainly makes sense to me that he's the pretty heavy favorite on the morning line. But I do wonder about the lack of pace and if that's going to have an effect on him.
Yeah, at the end of the day, he's just the horse in this race that appears to have upside. He's so lightly raced compared to some others in here, coming into it in great form. 7 furlongs is not supposed to be any problem with him, given the versatility that he's displayed in his last couple of starts, winning both shorter and longer than this. I think pace is a real concern, though he strikes me as the kind of closer that does have a little bit more tactical speed than some others in this race. I think that pace projector is right, that shows him up stalking the pace early. I think he's not going to be that far off it. Nobody should be that far off it in this Vosburgh, just given how slow the pace is expected to be. But he's one of the few that I don't think will be that pace compromised. It's just a question of how short a price you want to take on a horse like this in a race where the pace is so murky. Let's move on to a horse who has some positive experience over this Aqueduct dirt course, and that is the number 1 Southern District. We're going to go 4 races back in his past performances to take a look at his allowance win back in February at Aqueduct. And Greg, I think it's important to note horses that have had success over this sometimes quirky Aqueduct dirt track, and he was pretty impressive on this day.
When Aqueduct first reopened as Aqueduct or Belmont at the Big A, I was a little concerned that maybe the track would play like it did in the winter, which was very quirky. It didn't at first, but as of late, it's been pretty slow track. So I think there is some relevance to the fact that he did run well over it back in February. He was in pretty good form. I don't know what the excuse was last time where he was a complete no-show at even money, just didn't do any running at all. But I guess it's a good sign that Chad Brown has him right back in the races.
Yeah, I don't know what happened last time either. You would imagine there was some kind of excuse for that race. He's been off for about 2 months since then. He was cutting back to the 7 furlong distance that day, but it's hard to believe it was just the cutback that did him in because he never was involved in that race. And he had been competitive at the 7 furlong pole in his mile races prior to that. So it didn't feel like it was the distance that got him beat. He just was not himself at Saratoga last time. If he bounces back with one of his better efforts and those 120 plus time form US speed figures, he's very much in the mix here. And I think he's one that you have to take seriously. But he's another that you have to worry about the trip a little bit because he really does not possess any early speed at all. Let's move on to a horse who has had plenty of success both at the 7 furlong distance and at Aqueduct, and that is the number 5 Drafted. Let's take a look at his last victory when he won 3 races back in his past performances. This was at Monmouth in the Mr. Prospector Stakes. And Craig, this is what Drafted does. He lags behind early, makes this big run through the stretch to get up to win, but it's going to be hard to use that kind of running style in this race with no speed to set up that late rally.
Right. This one, as we've talked about, it's just kind of a real puzzle. I don't know how it's going to play out. He does seem like a horse who would be affected by it. He might be a little bit off form, though I don't want to judge him too much by that Forgo, where it was just way better horses than what we're seeing in here. And before that, he lost to a horse at Delaware who's actually pretty good, went on to win at Charlestown after that. So I guess he fits as anybody in here. And the one difference, he's going to offer a better price than the other two we've talked about.
Yeah, I think David Duggan, his trainer, has crafted a really smart campaign for him this year. He's taken advantage of some weaker spots on the New York racing calendar, like when he achieved that grade 3 victory in the toboggan and then again a grade 3 in the Run Happy, both races that did not come up that strong. I think he's found another one of those spots here in this grade 2 Vosburgh. And like you said, the only times he ran poorly this year when he tried grade 1 company in the Forgo and the Carter, I think you can excuse those races. And to me, he's just a really strong fit here. And we'll see how the pace works out for him and everybody else who has that similar running style. Another horse who wants to rally from off the pace is the number 3 Eastern Bay. Let's take a look at his last out victory when he won at Parks just 10 days ago. But Craig, quick turnarounds are not really a concern for this barn.
No, Norm Cash does not mind running them. And thank goodness for Norm Cash because he has 2 of the 5 runners in this field without him. Who's to say how ugly this race would be? He also trained Sir Alfred James, the other horse whose name I'm forgetting that's just run a ton of times this year. But he knows how to do it because he keeps these horses in good form. Eastern Bay has been in great form since he was claimed. Last time at Parks, he ran that 112 speed figure, but I think it was even a better race than that as he came from off the pace in a race that had no pace whatsoever, kind of like this one. So I suspect he's a horse who's going to be right up near the front and be pretty dangerous in this spot.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see that either. He is a horse that usually drops back to last and makes one run, but somebody's going to have to be forward in this race, so maybe he's a candidate to do so. And like you said, he's been in great form recently. This is a step up in class for him. I think the best horse that he's faced recently has been that stablemate, Sir Alfred James, who did beat him 2 back at Charlestown. But he is a horse that I think is coming into this race in top form and has to be considered. Maybe not so much the other Norman Cash runner in here, the number 2 Jalen Journey. Now, Craig, there was a time when Jalen Journey would have been very dangerous in this race because he used to have a lot of early speed and he used to run speed figures that would make him pretty tough against this field. It just feels like that form has left him recently.
The form has left, the early speed has left. I just don't know what there is to see with him in here. He actually ran in that same night at Charlestown where he went long in the Charlestown Classic. Has already run back twice since then to show you Norman Cash's MO, but it's hard for me to make a case for him. I guess if you believe the pace projector and think he would have a clear open lead, maybe he'd be worth a small shot at what's going to be a really big price, but he's not for me.
He did just run on Monday at Park, so he'd be coming back on 5 days rest. Usually you would consider those horses potential scratches, but we've seen trainer Norman Cash do that before, so perhaps he does run in this spot. I'd imagine they try to be forward with him. I just kind of doubt that he has that early speed anymore. Craig, let's throw up our picks for this race. And we both respect the number 5 Drafted. We each have him in there. I have him on top. You have him second. I I worry about the trip for him. He's a horse that typically does need some pace ahead of him, but I think he just fits really well in this field. He reliably shows up when he faces these slightly weaker sprint fields in New York. So I did put him on top, just thinking he'd probably be the best price of the horses that I was considering. But I've got no knock against your top pick, Eastern Bay, who just seems to be in great form right now.
Yeah, it's a race where I just don't trust the favorites. I don't want any parts of them at what are going to be short prices, especially in the 5 horse field. Draft that has been consistent. I expect them to run well. And Eastern Bay, this mount might sound funny, but it would almost seem fitting for an 8-year-old gelding to win this race the way it came up this year. So I think he's going to offer some value, be up closer than some of the others, and give it a good go.
Yes, we both have 8-year-old geldings on top of our picks in this race, trying to beat those 4-year-olds, Southern District and Elite Power, who figure to take most of the money in the Grade 2 Vosburgh on Saturday at Belmont at the Big A. Good luck if you're playing the races this weekend.